Welcome to the Cotswolds Lecture 2024. The Cotswolds tournament is run by Richard and Caroline Biddle every year at the Bear at Rodbury in the Cotswolds in the west of England. The very fine hotel is pictured here. The tournament is great fun, great food, great wine, great company, and great backgammon. What more could you want? My name's Chris Bray. If you haven't come across me before, in my day job, I worked in IBM. But my passion has always been backgammon, which I've played for over 40 years. I've been a newspaper columnist for about 26 years, published 9 books. The 10th is underway, albeit slowly. I represent the UK. I'm an analyst, commentator, teacher, and a writer. And I have a website, which you can see there, which has plenty of backgammon content and a problem of the day every Monday to Friday. So let's move to the lecture itself. This is entitled The Crazy Ones. This is based on an advert created by the Apple Corporation in 1997. Steve Jobs, who created Apple back with Steve Wozniak back in the early 80s, and he had then subsequently left Apple, ran a company called Apricot, which went nowhere, and then Apple re-employed him as CEO towards the end of the 90s. As part of what he did, he produced this advert, which to my knowledge has no brand, or certainly it has no product or service in it. It's purely a branding proposition to get Apple to the forefront of people's knowledge. It contains 17 very famous people, and you can have a bit of fun trying to identify those as the ad plays, but the key is to listen to the words, which I'm now playing.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
So that strapline, Think Different, was created in direct competition to IBM, who just come up with the strapline of Think. Those people all had a significant influence on the world. So that's given to very few people. And whilst the cat here may never be asked or told ever to think about outside the box, the people who do think outside the box, to use a business term, are the people who make things change. So what then if we took that idea and applied it to backgammon? Who are the people who over time have had a significant influence on backgammon and the direction that the game has gone over the years? Now, we're not going to go all the way back in time. I'm going to pick this up round about the time of the Romans. They had a game called Duodecim Scripta et Tabula. The backgammon board itself has been around for 5,000 years, and the idea of 24 points and 15 checkers have also been around for most of that time. The games that are played on that board have varied significantly over the years, and here you will see an early Roman board, and you will note that there are 3 dice, and those 3 dice survive for quite a long time, and will come to the changeover in due course. The first of our crazy backgammon players is the Emperor Nero, who would play for the equivalent of $5,000 a point way back then. History does not record what happened if anybody actually had the temerity to beat him. So things in backgammon happen very slowly, and of course there's very little documentation. One of the very first significant books to cover the game, or at least the board, is called the Book of Games. It's a Spanish book published in 1283, I've read some of the English translation. You will note 24 points, 15 checkers, remain constant. And the book contains 20 to 30 different games that can be played on this board. None of them resemble the game that we play today, and you will note that there are still 3 dice. So there are 2 very famous paintings that feature backgammon board. Firstly, the Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch, which was a triptych, the 3 panels being the Garden of Earthly Delights, the Garden of Eden and Hell. I give you no marks for guessing which of the panels backgammon was in, and yes, you're right, it's Hell, and this is it blown up. 24 points, 3 dice, and a cast of improbable characters. And the second most famous one is The Triumph of Death by Bruegel, 1562. And again, here's a backgammon board. Even in the blow-up, it's hard to pick out the 3 dice and so on. But there are, and again, another improbable cast of characters, a fantastic painting. So, life continued on. The Roman name had been abbreviated as Tables. You'll find it Tables referred to both by Shakespeare and by Chaucer. But somewhere between the death of Shakespeare and round about the middle of the 17th century, backgammon appeared. Some crazy person somewhere decided that 3 dice should become 2, but in compensation for that, doubles are played twice, as they are today. The word backgammon first appeared in print, and of course, no one knows the true origin of the word. Possibly Old English words beg and gammon, meaning back and game. The internet wasn't around in 1645, strangely enough, so no one knows, and we will never know unless someone unearths a document hitherto undiscovered. The triple game, the backgammon, is introduced. So until then, you could only win a single game or a gammon, but now the backgammon was introduced. This may all have been done to speed up the game. It's hard to tell, in all honesty. And the vie, increasing the stakes, appears briefly. So if you were playing for 1 point, the first vie increased it to 2, but the next one only increased it to 3 and then to 4 and so on. And then it promptly died out. And we'll come back to doubling in a moment or two, but no one knows who created it. No one knows where it went. So we then have to move on another 300 years to reach a time when we do have some documentation on what was going on and what happened. And the Roaring Twenties, the time of the Great Gatsby, fast living, and everyone wanted more excitement in their lives, both in work and in play. And 2 things happened in the world of games in the middle of that decade. Firstly, contract bridge was invented. Until then, it had been auction bridge. But Harold Vanderbilt, steaming on the SS Finland through the Panama Canal with a few mates one day, decided that auction bridge wasn't where it should be, and they invented contract bridge. So there's a very clear date as to when contract bridge came into existence. And in backgammon, doubling and chouettes, the multi-person version of the game, appeared in that year. How do we know that? Well, we didn't know it for a long time, and when I was doing early history work, it was always assumed that doubling originated in the gentlemen's clubs of New York, and that's what I wrote for many years. And then this magazine, Harper's Bazaar, the October 31 edition, was discovered, and in it was an article by a guy called Walter L. Richard, who was an American who wrote a book on the game. Obviously, a bunch of Americans came to Europe for the summer season and played on the Playboy circuit of France. And in fact, according to the article, and again, we've only got one article, so it's not absolute proof, the first game involving doubling took place in the Travellers Club in Paris in 1926 between the Grand Duke de Lutre of Russia and Axel de Wischeld of Denmark. Again, no proof, but the article is very well written and copies of it are freely available to anybody who wants it, and it's certainly worth reading, and it really ties down doubling to that year of 1926. What you didn't have in the early days was a method of recording doubling. So the first thing that came along were backgammon matches. And these are Bakelite sticks, probably each colour, and nearly certainly each colour had a different value. And that was used to record the number of points that you had won. This is my own set of backgammon matches. There are a few of these around in the world, not a huge number. I got this set off eBay for $400, just to give you some idea of the current value of these things. And it's a beautiful, beautiful bit of history. The second thing that was used was a dial at the side of the board. It was actually attached to a backgammon board. This is my own one, again, Bakelite. I'm aware of only 2 of these in the world, but this one I got for $10 on eBay, so I was very happy with that. I did get it about 35 years ago. And there is proof of this with Douglas Fairbanks Jr. in a famous picture using this device. But where did the doubling cube come from? Who invented it? And again, nobody knew. I spent years looking at newspaper archives and found nothing to indicate where the doubling cube had come from, and no one knew until recently. I'm indebted to Albert Stegg for researching the evening papers. So I'd only looked at the daily morning newspapers. I never gave a thought to the evening newspapers. And this guy, who you won't know or recognize because the photo is awful, is Grosvenor Nicholas. And he was yet another writer and teacher. And in 1931, he wrote a series of articles for the London Evening Standard explaining in very great detail how the game of backgammon should be played and the rules around it. But then in his article of May the 14th appear these famous words. About a year ago, the writer originated what is known as the doubling cube. This is a cube resembling a large die, but instead of the numbers 1 to 6, the 6 surfaces are marked with the numbers in geometrical progression, 2, 4, 8, and so on up to 64. So there you have it. The doubling cube was originated in 1931 by Grosvenor Nicholas. He goes on to say he wasn't sure whether it would catch on. Obviously, it did. So another of our crazies, the man who invented the doubling cube. And now we'll move on to some other people who've had a significant influence on the game. You may or may not recognize these guys. On the left is Oswald Jacobi, fantastic bridge player, fantastic backgammon player, author of the backgammon book, and his co-author will appear in a minute. And Hugh Hefner, the originator of the Playboy Club, is absolutely fascinated by the game and played it for many, many years. Jacobi invented the Jacobi rule. So in a money game, a gammon cannot be won unless the cube has been turned. Again, another attempt to speed up the game, so you didn't have to endlessly wait for someone to try and win an undouble gammon. He was forced to turn the cube and take a point so he could move on to the next game. His co-author of the backgammon book is this guy, John Joachim Randolph Crawford, and he invented the Crawford rule. So when one player reaches match point in a tournament game, the doubling cube cannot be used in the next game, and this is now known as the Crawford game. So this is to give the leader some compensation when he gets to match point, because every game after the Crawford game will be played with a cube on 2, giving his opponent the chance to win either 2 points or 4 points if it wins the gammon. So the Crawford rule was put in to redress the balance. And now we'll move on to the modern is perhaps wrong for the 1960s, but the modern tournament circuit. Pictured here are Lee Janot, one of 4 women to have won the World Backgammon Championship, and importantly, Prince Alexis Obolensky. Another crazy man. He was a Russian emigre. He had been taught to play backgammon by his gardener in Russia before moving to the US. So the whole of the modern circuit, we're indebted to an unknown gardener in Russia. He came and created the international backgammon circuit. He created the first ever international backgammon tournament, won by Charles Wacker III of Chicago, who beat Porter Ijams in the final. And he also created the World Championship. And here is a picture of the first ever World Championship held in 1967. Again, Porter Ijam's features, and Tim Holland, who's actually on the left and about to move a checker. Tim was a fantastic player and won the first 3 World Championships in 67, 68 and 71. You can tell it's the 60s. Look at the dress sense. Gentlemen still in ties, mini skirts. And watching it is Obolensky himself. If we spin it round and we look at it from the other side, then you get a better picture of Porter Ijam's, and again, more of the fashion sense of the time. Let's move forward once again and look at 3 more characters who've had an influence on the game. So these are Jason Lester, Roger Lowe, and Barclay Cook. We'll come on to Lester and Cook in a minute. Roger Lowe was a very, very good player, and one of the reasons he was a very good player was he had an eidetic memory, a photographic memory, and could remember the moves of every game he played for a considerable period of time after the event. Not surprisingly, he was a strong player and learnt a lot. So let's look at the first time at a backgammon board. Consider now how opening moves were played back in 1975 and then in the modern day. So how would you play 5-3, 6-2 and 6-4 as an opening roll? So when I started playing backgammon, which was around about this time, everybody, when they rolled 5-3, would play 13-10, 13-8. Okay. Because it was felt that making the 3-point was too deep in your board so early in the game. Back in 75, Leicester switched to making the 3-point, and everyone noticed that he seemed to be doing rather better than the people who played 2 down. As a result, everybody else switched to making the 3-point, and of course nowadays you wouldn't do anything else. Again, when I started playing backgammon 6-2, he played 13-5 and slotted the 5-point. And for years I played that, and I still come across the old person who does it even today. The idea, obviously, to build the 5-point on the next roll. But theory has now shown that 24-18, 13-11 is the better play. There are 1 or 2 instances in match play, by the way, where 13-5 is still correct. And then 6-4, do you run away? 24-14, do you play 24-18, 13-9, or do you make the 2-point? Now, if I'd made the 2-point back in the mid-70s, I would have been laughed at. But subsequent analysis and computers have shown that making the 2-point is a perfectly viable play for these moves. 8-3, 6-3, 24-18, 13-11, and you take your pick. The play is often dictated for 6-4. If it's a match, then the correct play is dictated by the score. So now we're in the mid-70s and we come on probably to the most important person in backgammon, recent backgammon history, Paul McGreal. Was he crazy? Well, in some ways, yes, he was. He was a maths professor, a chess master, and he switched in the 1970s to playing backgammon because he felt it was more of a challenge, and he took many of the names we know today, like Roberti and Goulding, along with him, and Lester and Lowe. The term genius is often overused, but Paul had an IQ of about 182. And I think the term genius is accurate when applied to him. He found difficulty living in the real world sometimes, and if you look at him as he passed away in March 2018, then obviously the cares of life had got to him, and he'd spent a little bit too much time with substances that he should not have used. But his influence on the game of backgammon was profound. He published the book Backgammon in 1976. It would not have been published without his second wife forcing him to do so. He subsequently started 5 books and finished none of them. But backgammon obviously has some mistakes in it. It was written in 76, but it created the basic principles for how you should play the game. And most of those principles hold true today, which is a testament to Paul's skill in documenting it. There's a couple of photos here of him working in his apartment with a board, clean-faced, fresh-faced, no computer, of course, a nice little electric typewriter there. You've got to realize how much effort people put into writing books before the advent of word processors and computers. And this is my favorite McGreal quote, which I will read. I'm always at war with luck and disorder. I'm always trying to impose my will over the randomness of the dice, over what seemingly has no structure. I may be sounding sort of dramatic, but what I'm trying to do in backgammon is to create order out of chaos. And I guess in a psychological sense, I'm trying to make sense out of the world. People think there is so much luck in backgammon, but that is very unfair. They think there's not that much to the game, and that is totally false. Backgammon is much, much more difficult, much more complex, much deeper than anyone can imagine. The dice create the surface chaos, which is always riling things up, but there are patterns underneath the surface that involve advanced, beautiful, non-obvious, non-trivial ideas. It is my job to uncover these patterns. And he spent a large part of his life, he did occasionally play poker, but trying to make sense out of backgammon. About 6-7 years before he died, he invited me to write a book with him, Backgammon 2. Unfortunately, his lifestyle was, and the 8-hour time difference between the West Coast of America and London, was not conducive to writing a book. And although I still have some notes and positions that he sent me, I don't think there's enough there to make a book out of it. He was a friend for many years. I took lessons from him for 6 months in the late 1980s. And he was just great to be with and to be around, and you learn so much. You'll notice I've picked out the phrase order out of chaos. And now let's move to another crazy person, Bill Roberti. How to Play the Opening Backgammon is a series of 3 books. Part 1, A New Way of Thinking. Part 2, Everything Matters. A key phrase in backgammon: every pip, every checker, every point matters. And he's just published his 3rd book, How to Play the Opening Backgammon, Order from Chaos, surprisingly enough. Now, that wasn't the original title when he announced the series, and I just wonder if Bill has given a nod to Paul by calling it Order from Chaos. But again, these 3 books, if you study them, will give you a thorough grounding, and I mean thorough, in the opening and how to play it. And if you could apply everything in those 3 books, you would be well ahead of your competition. Yes, they're not the most exciting books you will ever come across, but they are absolutely worth reading. So here's just an example from the most recent book, How Should Red Play 3-1? We're going to look at 2 scenarios. Firstly, this position where the race is close, white has only 1 back checker. You've really got the choice of 8 to 5, 6 to 5, making the 5 point. You can stack on the 10 point, or you can make the bar point. Which is right? Well, actually, it's close, but making the bar point is correct. It leaves white only 2 numbers, 3-6 and 6-3, to hit the exposed block. Which is a reasonable risk, but when your opponent only has 1 back checker, you need to block the big numbers. So 10 to 7, 8 to 7 just wins out over 8 to 5, 6 to 5. Let's change it where red is now 28 pips ahead and is now seeking to bring home his checkers into the home board without too much risk. Does this change the answer? Well, yes, it does. And now playing completely safe is correct. And I'll refer back to this position when I talk about Michihito Kageyama a little bit later. So you can see, change the position, everything matters. And this is just but one example of an excellent book. Now let's go back in time again. Look at our 2 years, and how would you play 6-2, 6-3, and 6-4 when your opponent has opened with a 3-1? So when I was playing at this time, you just ran with one of the rear checkers. It was viewed that splitting to your opponent's bar point was far too dangerous, given that he'd already made his 5 point. And then a gentleman called Roy Friedman, I think he lived in New England, created Leading Edge. It was a magazine that ran for only 6 issues, but the first one covered this precise question. And he did some very detailed analysis, and he basically said, despite the fact that your opponent has made his 5 point, you should still run to the, you should still split to the bar point. And the analysis is very good. Subsequent computer analysis has shown that with 6.2 and 6.3, you should split and come down, but computers tell us that 24.14 is slightly more accurate with 6.4. But again, another of the crazies. He contributed a bit to backgammon and how we all move forward as a group in trying to understand the game. And now we come to Paradoxes and Probabilities, a book by Berkeley Cook. Berkeley was a free thinker, no doubt about that. And he published this book with 168 backgammon problems in it. But my note here says caveat emptor, buyer beware. So around this time, people played incredibly what you would call pure backgammon. They didn't worry about blots and shots. They just wanted to put the checkers where they wanted to be. The sad result of this is that about 50% of the solutions in this book are actually wrong. It's great, though, to read it and study and understand what people were doing back then. So the trick with the book is firstly to find the correct play, and then secondly to find the Cook play. So red here has a 6-1 to play. I think most people would find 8-2 to 1 pretty obviously. Executing a blitz as if you can, and obviously not doing anything else. The Cook play is to play 13-7, 5-4, which, as you can see, is a quintuple blunder according to Extreme Gammon, by putting the checkers where you want them. Yes, you'd like them to be there, but in the real world, you have to play real backgammon and take note of what your opponents do, something that Cook does not do necessarily in this book, unfortunately. Now, one of the things that happened back in 73 was the first ever match between the USA and the UK. It was held at the Claremont Club in London. There were 2 players on each team. For the US, Walter Cook and his son, Berkeley Cook and his son Walter, and for the UK, Philip Martin and Joe Dweck. It was the first time that a whole match or a whole series of whole games was ever recorded and subsequently analysed. So that was a huge step forward. And many of you will know what a triple tiger is. Some of you won't. Triple tiger is when you voluntarily expose 3 blots in your home board to put 2 checkers on the bar. It's a fairly rare play. And here, in fact, just making the 2 point is fine and correct. But hitting 2 and exposing those 3 blots actually isn't the end of the world. Yes, it's an error. But credit to Walter Cook for even finding the play. No one but Walter would have made this play back in that time. So great fun. And we'll come back to match recording a bit more. Now, not all crazy backgammon players are nice, crazy backgammon players. So let's move on to Gabby Horowitz and Bruce Roman. Gabby was a hustler on the West Coast, playing at Pips in Los Angeles. Bruce Roman was his writing partner, a member of the Church of Scientology. But Gabby was the real villain of the piece. He was basically a hustler and a cheat, I'm afraid to say. He also published, the 2 of them published one of the worst books ever written on backgammon called Dynamic Cube Strategy, which sadly is not even worth the paper it's written on. He had a checkered life, and at one point he was married to Marcia Clark, more famous for being the lead prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson trial. And I put a link in there where you can read her short article on living with a backgammon hustler. Needless to say, the marriage didn't last that long. Marcia moved on to greater and better things. Meanwhile, Horowitz met a sad end. Horowitz and Roman were playing with a gun one day, and you don't play with a live gun, irrespective of the circumstances. Roman fired the gun away from Horowitz into the ceiling, but it ricocheted and the bullet lodged in Gabby's brain. He basically ended up being a vegetable, survived a number of years before being moved to Israel to pass away. So you could say he got his comeuppance, but obviously it's not a great way to go. We return briefly to recording matches. So that match in 73 was the first to be recorded. And then on to our next crazy man. Crazy not made in any derogatory sense whatsoever. So Kent Goulding published a series of books called Backgammon with the Champions in 1981. There were 12 books. Roberti then published Dweck versus Genoud, the World Championship match from 1981. Amazingly, notation was not standardized till the mid-1980s. Early match recording was long and difficult. People would pay people to sit at the side of the board and write down the moves. And not until the bots and computers arrived in 1992 did match play recording become easy. Pictured below is, I'll just flick back there, is a page from Backgammon with the Champions. All of those diagrams were created by hand with rubber stamps. We're not talking sophisticated word processing tools here. So Kent did a fantastic job in publishing this book. And then with Bill, they produced a magazine called Inside Backgammon, which ran from 1991 to 1999. This is the first ever edition. This was a huge step forward in backgammon theory and getting people to understand the game with sophisticated rollouts, initially done by hand and subsequently with very early computers. But the quality of the analysis in this magazine is outstanding. I have a full set at home and occasionally dip into them for fun. And they had between them very different senses of humor, but they combined incredibly well to produce a stunning magazine. Around one of their other colleagues was this gentleman, Kit Woolsey, a man who at the age of 80 is still playing backgammon with a performance rating of around 2. Kit is a bridge master, backgammon master, has published numerous books, does lecturing, teaching, and so on. Two of his most important books are How to Play Tournament Backgammon. Not a long monograph, but very insightful, giving the basics for how to play tournament backgammon. And more recently, the Backgammon Encyclopedia, Volume 1 and 2, which is a set of cube reference positions. There are very few books on doubling, but this is one, or those two are absolutely worth having in your library. Again, they're not an exciting read, but they are fundamental to becoming a good backgammon player. The first volume is interesting because they lost the proofs and it was not available for 10, 15 years, I think. It has recently been republished by Justin Noel on his website, backgammonuniversity.com. You can buy it as a PDF from there, and I heartily recommend that you do so. The other thing that Woolsey introduced was Woolsey's law of doubling. So you can see it here. If I were doubled in my opponent's position, is it a take? Yes, I'm absolutely sure. No, I'm absolutely sure it's pass, or I'm not 100% sure. C. If the answer is C, it's always correct to double. So this has helped me more times than I can to remember. If I don't know, I just ship the cube, because you then end up winning 2 or 4 points as opposed to cashing 1 point a bit later. Yes, it will occasionally backfire, but at the end of the day, it will do you a lot more good than it will do harm. And our next man into the arena is this gentleman, Matvey Nathanson, also known as Falafel. Falafel was a great money player, reasonable tournament player, but really a very good money player. But he was also a fantastic commentator. So there have been, in my opinion, 2 truly great commentators on backgammon in the time that I've been watching. There are lots of very good, but truly great is this guy, Falafel and McGreal. And between them, they covered a large number of World Championship finals. And McGreal did the World Series of Backgammon thing with Andy Bell, and that was fantastic. So those 2 stand above everybody else, although Sebastian Wilkinson, the UK player at this year's World Championship, gave an outstanding commentary on one of Chris Rogers' matches, and I suspect if he wanted to, he would become one of the great commentators because he's knowledgeable, insightful, humorous, and able to communicate with his audience, which is the fundamental to being a good good commentator. Let's switch tack now, and we're going to move into the world of computing. Now, I'm sure nobody will recognize this guy. He's a guy called Hans Berliner. He created a computer program called Gammanoid. He'd already written chess programs, and in the late 1970s, he thought he'd have a go at writing a backgammon program. And this is, of course, before the bots, and this is before PCs, so I can't remember what computer he wrote it on, but he wrote a program. And in July 1979, Gammanoid, which is what it was called, defeated the newly crowned world champion Luigi Villa 7-1. That's reasonable enough, but we know it's a short match, so we know there was some luck. And then you get to look at the performance ratings of both Luigi and Gammanoid. So Gammanoid, intermediate, 13, Luigi Villa, 6.47. And if you go back and you analyze World Championship matches from around this time and then through the early 80s, before the advent of neural net backgammon programs, virtually nobody played with a PR below 6. That UK-USA match that I referenced earlier, I think the guy's PR was about just under 8, and there were a couple in double figures. So despite the game being theoretically some 5,000 years old, we were still playing it at a very amateurish level before computers came along to give us a hand. And here's the next man into the ring, TD Gammon. So until Jerry Tesaro, who worked for IBM, came along, all backgammon computer programs were based on tree search technology, the same as chess programs, and that just doesn't work for backgammon because there are too many possible moves. So he developed TD Gammon, a self-teaching neural net that learned to play backgammon, and then it played itself to develop its strategy. And now we see a fundamental shift in backgammon strategy, and things that had been thought of as correct for years were proved to be wrong. He also, Tesaro, did a lot of work on game strategy decisions in Watson, which was IBM's supercomputer that won the game of Jeopardy for our US listeners. But again, this is a massive step forward for backgammon, a real step change in theory and capability. And of course, we then went through Jellyfish, Snowy, GNU backgammon until we arrive at Extreme Gammon, which the current version, unfortunately, is now nearly 15 years old, version 2. Created by this guy, Xavier Dufour de Citres. It needs some work at this point. It is the de facto standard for the computer programming in the backgammon world. But he has reached a point where he's no longer interested in developing it. We need a philanthropist, an enthusiast, and someone with a bit of money to take this on and develop it. There are known flaws in XG, albeit relatively small. The user interface is not great. It's fantastic compared with what we used to have, and I just wish that someone would now take it on. There's a mobile version as well, but the Android version has been withdrawn from the Play Store, and the Apple version has a known fault whereby where there's a forced move, the dice roll isn't shown, which is incredibly annoying. But unfortunately, it would take a great deal of work to sort out. So for the moment, XG is the standard. If anyone listening to this would like to put up a few $100,000 to develop the next level of backgammon computer program, I would be more than grateful. And with the advent of AI, this really cannot be that far away. And modern computer programs have led to modern definitions, the banana split, double tiger, double falcon, wash, goalkeeper, etc. I'm not going to go through those. You either know them or you don't. If you don't, read books, study, and find out. And to our next gentleman who has a significant influence, I believe, on the game, and that's Michihito Kageyama with his writing partner, Roland Herrera. Mishi's written 3 books. They're very simplistic. You could criticize them for having a lot of white paper, but they are fundamentally sound. And if you follow the ideas expressed in those 3 books, then you will be a much better player. Back checker strategy, to my mind, is by far the most important of the 3. I changed how I play the game because of this book. So definitely worth reading. Mishi is a very strong player, obviously. and along with Moshi, the two of them led the Japanese charge into the world of backgammon. There are others, Hideaki Ueda. Just saying, there's an up-and-coming breed of young Japanese players who are very strong, so beware of them at tournaments. And again, let's change tack again. Now, Louis de Jong, who's the guy on the right, introducing here Patty Rubin, Phyllis Radcliffe, and Nancy Weishaw at a tournament in Nassau. Patty ran the World Championship for many, many years before passing away a couple of years ago. Louis was the MC at Monte Carlo for many years. He wrote a most amusing and interesting and educational book on the game. And last year was inducted into the US Hall of Fame for backgammon, which was richly deserved. He lost the World Championship final to Carol Crawford in 1973. He's now 88. I have lunch with him twice a year. He's very sharp. He can still produce the position where he missed two successive single shots to win the World Championship when playing against Carol Crawford. He missed both shots, as he's very keen to keep telling me. And he played a lot of his backgammon with these guys, the gamblers, the members of the Claremont set. So reading from left to right, John Aspinall, Lord Lucan, James Goldsmith, all of whom was crazy in their own way. Lucan probably more so than the other two. And of course, he's still missing. If you want to know where he is, then I suggest you buy this book, because then you will find out precisely where Lord Lucan is. But in those times, these guys played for huge amounts of money when they shouldn't have been. So here's a position from a game, and again, Lewis showed me this over lunch one day. He's red, he's playing James Goldsmith, the cube's on 32. They're playing for $250 a point. Lewis's last couple of rolls have all been forced, and he's ended up with this ungainly stack of checkers on his 4-point. So if he can smooth it out, great, he'll win a gammon or a backgammon. If he can't, nasty things might happen. Nasty things did happen. He rolled double 4, took 4 checkers off. And again, because White's got 4 checkers to bring in, Lewis wasn't too worried. He thought he'd be able to come into White's board and come around. But unfortunately, James replied with his own double 4. And sometime later, this position was reached. So the hit checker is closed out. White has a closed board. If you know your backgammon well, you'll know that if you've got 8 checkers off, you're about even money to win the game. White should not redouble. So Lewis said, look, we're playing for $250 a point. The cube's on 32. Let's call it a wash and go and have dinner. And James Goldsmith looked at him for a moment. He said, look, I'll tell you what we'll do. We won't do that. And he redoubled to 64. Obviously, it's no redouble. Obviously, it's a beaver. Surprisingly enough, Lewis didn't beaver this. The game ended with no more excitement. James won 64 points, and Lewis spent the rest of the year paying off that debt. There is a salutary warning here. Don't play for ludicrous stakes against people to whom money means absolutely nothing, because at some point in time, you are going to catch a cold. Here's a fun one from one of my own chouettes in the Battersea chouette many years ago. There were actually four players of the white checkers. In the box was the tempestuous Turk, my friend Engin Ongol. And he's looking good. Obviously, a big double will win him a backgammon. He rolled 6-5 and took 2 checkers off. We then rolled something like I think 4-3 with and missed the shot, the double shot at the exposed checker. Engin hungrily picked up the dice and rolled double 1. Again, he can't bear off that last checker. And we rolled another number, another 4-3, I think. And Engin was on roll again with a chance to just cash that big backgammon, and he rolled 2-1. This time we hit the exposed checker, and sometime later we reached this position with white on roll. if you've read Walter Trice's Backgammon Boot Camp, you can quickly solve this particular problem, and you will know that it is a redouble and a take, which is what happened. Engin won the game, so instead of winning 4 sixes, he lost 4 fours. An expensive night, and just again beware of the vagaries of the dice. And this demonstrates this is a clear double and a clear take. Redouble and take. And let's finish, I think, with probably the worst redouble I've ever seen. Unfortunately, it features my friend Engin again. This is the final of the London Open Super Jackpot tournament many years ago. Red is leading 8-3 to 11, owns an 8 cube. Obviously, he should play on and cash later when it is an appropriate time to cash. Engin had some sort of brainstorm and redouble this to 4, allowing his opponent, Falafel, to redouble to 8 on the next roll. But of course, the dice were on Engin's side. His next roll was 4 run. He rolled a couple of big doubles. White never had a chance, and Engin won the super jackpot. So again, you can be good, you can be very good, but the dice will get you at some point in the end. No redouble. And possibly the saddest of them all, this is taken from Lewis's book. This is from the mid-1960s, a club called the Apron Strings in Chelsea. White is on roll, red is on the bar. Estimate red's winning chances. Well, surprisingly enough, they're in the millions to 1 against. What actually happened was that white rolled double 5, taking 4 checkers off. Red rolled double 1, stayed on the bar. White rolled double 4, took 4 checkers off, and now red hit the exposed checker. Red has already got 3 checkers out of play on his ace point and 2 checkers on his 3 point that are going only to the 2 point. But of course, he closed out, managed to get all his checkers perfectly aligned, closed white out, at which point, because of all those dead checkers, he was still under 1% to win the game. But of course, red won the game, or you wouldn't be seeing this position. The end of the story is that the gentleman who lost went home and woke his wife at 4 o'clock in the morning, got out his board and showed the position. Now, here's a word of advice. Do not ever go home after a bad loss and show your partner a position that you lost in. And particularly don't go on about it for the next month, which is precisely what he did. Ultimately, it led to his divorce. He moved to America and married his therapist. There's a moral to this story somewhere, but I'm not sure exactly what it is based on this position. In summary, you don't have to be crazy to play backgammon, but it certainly helps. So I hope you've enjoyed this tour through the crazy people and the not so crazy people who influenced the world of backgammon. And this will now be posted and you can listen to it and listen to it again. You can play the ad at the beginning and identify the 17 favourite people. I hope you've learned something along the way and enjoyed the afternoon or morning, whenever you're listening to it. And I wish you all the best in your backgammon future.